Welcome back to the Creatively Curious podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Walter. In this week's episode, I'll be talking about the categories of human experience, which is a framework for coaching that helps me as your coach organize your experience. So, what you're telling me, so that I can understand it better and help identify your distressing or unhelpful thinking patterns or thoughts. And usually there's a causative relationship among the components. So the components are there's a circumstance or a situation, and then there's thoughts that we have about that situation, feelings, and behaviors. So generally, the circumstance or situation will bring up thoughts. So we'll have certain thoughts about that situation, and then that will lead to feelings, and then that will lead to behavior. And it's not just a one-way street. Generally, all of those things will affect each other. And when I mention feelings, I'm talking about also bodily sensations, so sensations in our body. And lots of times when a client mentions a feeling that they're having, then I'll have them go into their body and see where in their body they are experiencing that feeling. So, circumstances are facts or a situation over which generally we have no control. So, an example could be my daughter was arrested, or my kids leave their dirty clothes all over their floor. These aren't real examples from my life, except for the dirty clothes on the floor. And then thoughts is how we interpret the circumstances or situation or what we make of them. So thoughts could be anything, but for the example of my daughter was arrested, maybe I'm having the thought that my daughter's a loser. Maybe for the example of my kids leave their dirty clothes all over the floor, they're disrespectful. Feelings. So when I'm having a certain thought, then I'll feel that potentially in my body. And so my kids don't respect me because they're leaving their clothes on the floor. I'm probably going to feel angry. I'm going to feel like maybe my chest is a bit tight. Maybe my palms are getting sweaty, and that would be different for everyone. So that includes, my emotion, anger, and then the bodily sensation. And it's good to separate those. And sometimes people can't verbalize what the emotion is if they're not really that aware of specific emotions, and no one's really talked to them about that or taught them about that. But generally they'll be able to feel that bodily sensation. So lots of times, as I mentioned, we'll go into the body and see what the person is feeling there. And then the behavior. So based on the thoughts and the feelings, you'll have a certain behavior. So, maybe I'm angry and I feel disrespected because my kids are leaving their dirty clothes on the floor. So then I scream at them to pick them up. And so when I have a coaching client, then generally they'll come in, they'll have a circumstance or a situation that is bothering them. And then I, take notes, and I am paying attention to the thoughts that they're having or speaking out loud that generally are painful or unhelpful, and then their feelings. And so go we can go lots of ways, but I'm paying lots of attention to those two things. And so we can kind of dive in closer and take a closer look at the thoughts that are painful, or we can take a closer look at the feelings and go that route. And it depends on the client. So they get to decide which way they want to go. And then taking a look at the actions or inactions that that is expressing from that certain situation. And then perhaps we can alter those actions. So, a particular example could be a student who's in university who's not going to class. So, that would be the circumstance. And then her behavior is that she's not going to class very often. And she reports that she's feeling really nervous and scared and anxious to go to class. So that's how she's feeling. So she was upfront with that. And then I would ask further, like, what's happening in her body when she's having those feelings. And she reports that she's sweaty, her heart is racing, her breathing rate has increased, and yeah, that's what she mentioned about her bodily sensations. Maybe her stomach's hurting. And then the behavior is that she skips class, or sometimes she'll go and sit at the back of the class and not participate and not want to say anything because she's scared to speak. So then the question is what thoughts is she having that create those feelings? And she was more upfront about her feelings as opposed to the thoughts. So then we dig a little bit deeper to see what those thoughts are. And an example of one of the thoughts was, if I talk in class, that will be horrible. And then that's an unhelpful thinking style of like overestimation of a negative outcome. Or she had some thoughts of, I will faint, I will have a heart attack based on her bodily sensations. And that's a catastrophizing, unhelpful thinking style. And I do have a podcast that lists a number of the unhelpful thinking styles. So I'll mention that below in the show notes if you want to take a listen to that. And then another thought was, no one else is feeling this way. I'm the only one who's scared and anxious to go to class, which I feel like is kind of like an all or nothing thinking style, and thinking that you're the only one, and of course no one else is feeling that way. So then it's taking a look at those thoughts. So is there evidence to support that thought, and how do you feel? So we've talked about how she feels when she's thinking those thoughts, how, and generally what I would do is use the Byron Katie, the work, for a scenario like that. And we would just look at one thought, one particular thought, the thought that's maybe creating the most emotion, the most bodily sensations, and tackle that. And the whole idea isn't to get rid of that thought, to erase that thought, or to control it in any way. It's just to take a look at it and to see how it's making us feel and how we treat ourselves, how we treat others, and what happens overall when we believe that thought. And then to create a bit of distance from that thought. So using the Byron Katie work, always ask, if you didn't have access to that thought anymore, it just didn't exist in your brain just for this moment or this session, how would you feel? And going through all of those other things, how would you treat yourself? How would you treat others if you didn't have access to that thought? It creates a bit of space and basically just an unhooking of our identification and our basically believing of that thought. So, the other thing that's important to mention is that we don't ever want to question the facts that somebody is experiencing. So, if they are walking into an unsafe environment every day and they're feeling anxious and uncertain and scared because things have been unsafe in the past and could be unsafe, then we wouldn't want to question that. That's their reality. So that's why in a coaching session, I would gather more information about what exactly is happening. But if, in this circumstance, it's like in a university classroom, hasn't been unsafe. There hasn't been any incidences of anyone saying mean things to this student or putting her down based on what she's saying. So it's really just her thoughts are creating this scary situation for her. And so that's really important to discern is that, is it the thoughts that are creating the situation or is it an actual unsafe environment? And then when we know that it's the thoughts that are creating the actions and these feelings, and then we can question them in partnership, obviously, with the client. And, if you're coming to coaching, then that's something that you're willing and able to move forward on is to question these thoughts and to see if then there could be a different outcome, different behavior on your part, and different actions. So I will do another podcast episode more on the Byron Katie work because it's a really big piece of what I do. And I think her work is so valuable and has been very helpful to clients that I've worked with. And it's been helpful to me too. I use the work on myself. And if you haven't heard of it, I'll include a link to her website so you can check her out. But basically I just wanted to touch on those categories. And so when I'm working with a client, then that's kind of what I'm thinking about is circumstance, so facts that we're dealing with, thoughts about the circumstance that are painful, like even, I'm thinking of one that I just read about the daughter, but you could have it about yourself, like I'm a loser or I'm not good at anything. So those are painful thoughts and for sure can be questioned. And then, yeah, looking at the thoughts, the feelings, and the actions or inactions of what a person is going through. And it can be really helpful to look at those thoughts and then create distance from them and to realize that we don't have to believe those thoughts, those painful negative thoughts. And you can even do this on your own. It is helpful to have a coach who can, we lots of times we have thoughts or beliefs that are so ingrained in us that we believe them like in our core. They're things that would be really hard to question on our own. So a coach can be helpful for that. But if you can think of a thought or you notice that you're having these thoughts, and that's the first step is to notice the thoughts, not to change them, not to try to rush them out, but just notice. So then who is the person that's noticing? That's kind of your higher self or your essential self. So if you can even get to that part of just noticing that you're having these thoughts, that's such a great step. And then to create more distance between you, that essential self and the thoughts, then you can start to question them. And again, we're not trying to control them or eliminate them, but just like, is that true? And do I have evidence for that? And do I have evidence for either the opposite of that or something else that feels more true? And you'll know in your body whether something is more true than that because it feels better. So Martha Beck, lots of times she'll talk about feeling free or not feeling free. And so it's that feeling of in your body, if you're constricted or tight and it doesn't feel good, then that's not true for you. And then if you feel freer or more open or more relaxed, then that is truer for you. So that can be helpful. And if you have any questions, please leave them below. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I'd love to have you rate and review the podcast and send it to someone that you know would enjoy it. And until next time, I will see you again.